step away from the gate. Hands where I can see them.
Lower your voice. I live here. This is my house.
Don't lie to me. You're casing the place.
I am a colonel in the Air Force. You are making a grave mistake.
You? A colonel? Don't make me laugh. Get on the ground now!
The officer's voice, captured on his body cam, is impatient, demanding ID now, ordering the man to place his hands on his head. The man's reply is a model of composure. He states he is at his own front gate and that there is no reasonable suspicion for the stop, requesting the officer's identification and reason for the detainment. A sarcastic laugh is audible as the officer dismisses the claim of residency, presenting a false choice between compliance or arrest for obstruction. This recording, from March 14th at 5:42 p.m., is the catalyst for one of the most emblematic cases of documented karmic retribution in recent history. It captures the moment police officer Rick Miller stopped United States Air Force Colonel James Hammond, a decorated officer, based on nothing more than his appearance in the affluent neighborhood he was sworn to protect. The interaction, filmed from 3 separate camera angles, would result in Officer Miller's summary dismissal, multiple criminal charges, and a civil lawsuit that would ultimately cost him $6 million. Before this career-ending confrontation, the scene was one of absolute tranquility. Colonel Hammond was completing his daily 6-mile run, his rhythmic breathing the only sound in the quiet air. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pristine lawns and meticulously maintained landscaping of the gated community. He was approaching the pedestrian gate to his own home, a $1.8 million residence, when Patrol Car Unit 3412 pulled up abruptly beside him, its tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. Officer Miller exited the vehicle with a posture that promised conflict, his mind already made up, about to initiate an interaction that would be meticulously recorded and would cost him everything he had. Officer Miller advanced, closing the distance with the predatory confidence of a man who believed his badge was a shield for his intentions. The peaceful afternoon air now crackled with attention entirely of his own making. His voice, when it came, was not an inquiry but an indictment, laced with a contempt that was as plain as the polished leather of his duty belt. He gestured vaguely at the multi-million-dollar homes that lined the street, his expression a mask of derisive disbelief. He saw a man out of place, a puzzle piece that did not fit the pristine image in his mind, and he had already decided on the solution. He ignored the man's athletic build, the expensive running watch on his wrist, the sheer self-possession in his stance. All he saw, all his training and years of accumulated bias allowed him to see, was a threat that needed to be neutralized. His words were a blunt instrument. He did not ask for a name, he demanded an explanation for an existence he found offensive. The accusation was a lazy, baseless script he had used dozens of times. The CCTV camera mounted on the stone gatepost whirred silently, its lens a dispassionate eye capturing every nuance of the impending disaster. Colonel Hammond, in stark contrast, remained a pillar of tranquility. He did not react to the officer's aggressive posture or the loaded insinuation in his tone. His breathing, barely elevated from his 6-mile run, remained steady and deep. He met the officer's hostile gaze, not with defiance, but with a calm, analytical focus, as if assessing a tactical situation. He was processing data, the officer's agitated state, his hand resting near his sidearm, the increasingly irrational nature of the confrontation. His response was a masterclass in de-escalation, his voice even and devoid of emotion. He clearly stated that he was a resident, that this was the gate to his property, and that he was simply returning from his daily exercise. He offered a simple, logical solution to the officer's supposed suspicion, a solution that would resolve the entire matter in under a minute. He explained that his identification was in his wallet, just inside his home, and if the officer would permit him to enter, he would gladly retrieve it. It was a reasonable proposition, offered by a reasonable man to someone he still assumed, against mounting evidence, was a professional doing a difficult job. He was giving Officer Miller an off-ramp from the collision course he had set, a chance to walk away with only his dignity wounded. The offer of a simple resolution was not just ignored by Officer Miller, it was perceived as an insult. In his distorted worldview, the man's composure was not a sign of innocence but of cunning. The calm, articulate speech was not an attempt to clarify, but a sophisticated form of resistance. Miller's face, already flushed with authority, darkened. A sneer twisted his lips as he took another step forward, deliberately invading the colonel's personal space. The documentary footage would later show Miller's pupils were dilated, a physiological response to the adrenaline and aggression coursing through his system. He was no longer a peace officer, he was a combatant who had already declared victory. He scoffed, a short, ugly sound of dismissal. The very idea that this man could live here, behind these gates, was so foreign to his understanding of the world that he treated it as a lie on its face. He saw the offer to retrieve ID, not as compliance, but a trick, a ploy to escape.
The colonel's rationality was a language he could not or would not understand. He only understood the crude calculus of dominance.
Colonel Hammond made one final attempt to appeal to reason, his patience unwavering, but a new, harder edge entering his voice. He subtly shifted his weight, a minute adjustment that nonetheless communicated he would not be physically intimidated. He raised a hand, not in a defensive gesture, but to point directly at the black dome of the community's primary security camera, clearly visible above them. He stated a simple, verifiable fact. Their entire interaction was being recorded from multiple angles. He added that he was certain the officer's own department would be very interested in reviewing the footage of this stop, a stop for which no probable cause had been established. This was not a threat, but a statement of inevitable consequence. It was a final warning, a last chance for Officer Miller to recognize the professional and legal precipice upon which he was standing. But for Miller, this was the final provocation. The mention of cameras and departmental review was a challenge to his authority. His mind, clouded by prejudice, snapped. All semblance of police procedure vanished, replaced by raw, unthinking aggression. He was done with words. He was going to put this man, this problem that did not fit, in his place. He barked a final command to place his hands on the wall, and when the colonel did not immediately comply, Miller lunged forward. He reached out and grabbed Colonel Hammond's arm, his fingers digging into the muscle with the intent to force him against the cold, unyielding stone of his own property gate. It was a catastrophic error, a physical assault that transformed an illegal stop into a federal crime, a touch that would cost him everything. The physical evidence presented to Officer Miller, the military identification card bearing the eagle insignia of a full colonel, was irrefutable. It was a tangible piece of reality that directly contradicted the narrative he had constructed in his mind. But for a man whose entire worldview was built on a foundation of brittle prejudice, reality was a threat to be defeated, not a fact to be accepted. Instead of de-escalation, Miller's mind chose defiance. The colonel's calm presentation of his credentials was not seen as proof of identity, but as a high-level deception, a sophisticated trick that insulted his intelligence as an officer of the law. A wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over him, erasing the last vestiges of professional training. The documentary footage, synced with his body cam audio, shows his face contorting into a mask of furious disbelief. He let out a sharp, derisive laugh, a sound heavy with scorn. He saw the ID as a forgery, the man's composure as the arrogance of a career criminal, and the entire situation as a direct challenge to his authority. He decided in that split second to escalate. He was no longer conducting a stop, he was now apprehending a felon. He pointed a trembling finger at the colonel, his voice rising to a near shout as he invented a new, more serious crime. He accused Colonel Hammond of impersonating a military officer, a federal offense. This was his point of no return, a conscious decision to plunge deeper into a self-made abyss. The omniscient, unblinking eye of the community's main security camera, the very one the colonel had pointed to moments earlier, recorded every detail of this catastrophic misjudgment in crystal-clear 4K resolution. Miller, blinded by his own fury, was oblivious that he was performing his career suicide on a public stage for a permanent record. He pulled out his department-issued radio, his movements jerky and agitated. He was going to bring the full weight of the department down on this man who dared to challenge his perception of the world. He pressed the transmit button, his voice strained and artificially urgent, reporting a hostile and potentially dangerous individual fraudulently claiming to be a senior military officer and requesting immediate backup. The call was completed. The police were on their way. The radio crackled with static as Officer Miller clipped it back to his vest, a thin, triumphant smile playing on his lips. The call was done. Backup was en route. In his mind, the narrative was complete, a perfect little story of a good cop catching a clever con man trying to pass himself off as a big shot. He savored the moment. The quiet before the sirens would validate his every action. He stood with his chest puffed out, a caricature of authority, enjoying the imagined scene of his fellow officers arriving to find him standing over this subdued, exposed fraud. The CCTV camera on the gatepost continued its silent, impartial recording, capturing the smug satisfaction on Miller's face, a final portrait of a man standing on the edge of a cliff, convinced he was about to learn how to fly. He crossed his arms, ready to wait, ready to perform for the arriving audience. But Colonel Hammond had a different schedule in mind. He did not wait for the sirens. With a slow, deliberate motion that was the antithesis of Miller's agitated energy, he reached into the small, zippered pocket on the back of his running shorts. The movement was economical,
precise, the kind of practiced efficiency that comes from decades of discipline. Miller's eyes narrowed, tensing for a trick, but the colonel's action was too calm, too devoid of threat. He produced a small black nylon wallet.
The documentary footage, when slowed down, would highlight the absolute steadiness of his hands. There was no tremor, no fumbling. His thumb and forefinger slid into a clear plastic sleeve and extracted a single, laminated card. He held it out, not as a plea, but as a verdict. The object that would end Rick Miller's career was a United States Department of Defense Common Access card. For a moment, Miller's brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. His gaze, clouded with scorn, fell upon the card. Then the details began to force their way through the thick fog of his prejudice. He saw the crisp, high-resolution photograph of the man standing before him, not in running gear, but in a pristine Air Force dress blue uniform, his chest adorned with a formidable array of service ribbons. He saw the name printed in stark block capitals, Hammond James R., and then his eyes fell on the rank. It was not the single silver bar of a lieutenant or the double bars of a captain. It was the unmistakable, iconic image of a silver eagle, its wings spread, clutching arrows and an olive branch. Full colonel, the insignia of a senior field-grade officer, a rank that placed Hammond in the top 1% of the entire United States military. The world seemed to slow down. The body cam footage captured the subtle yet catastrophic disintegration of Officer Miller's composure. The smug smirk evaporated, replaced by a slack-jawed vacancy. His eyes, which had been narrowed in suspicion, widened in pure, unadulterated shock. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly pallor. It was the look of a man who had just kicked what he thought was a stray dog, only to realize he had kicked a sleeping lion. The card was not a forgery. The holographic seal of the Department of Defense shimmered in the afternoon light, an incorruptible stamp of authenticity. The man's calm was not the arrogance of a criminal, it was the ingrained composure of a commander. As this new, terrible reality crashed down upon him, the distant wail of sirens began to cut through the air. The sound that had promised him victory just moments before now sounded like a funeral dirge. They were coming, just as he had requested, but they were not coming for the colonel. Do you see now why video evidence is the ultimate tool for justice? The camera never lies. If you believe every officer should wear a body cam, click the like button and subscribe to see the full, devastating consequences for Officer Miller. The approaching sirens, a sound that Officer Miller had summoned as his righteous cavalry, now morphed into a symphony of his own undoing. Each piercing shriek seemed to mock his rapidly dissolving confidence, a herald of a judgment he had unwittingly called down upon himself. The body cam footage from his own vest documents the stark physiological transformation, the triumphant smirk melting into a waxy, slack-jawed expression of dread, the color draining from his face until he appeared almost translucent under the harsh afternoon sun. 2 standard patrol cars and a black, unmarked supervisor sedan screamed to a halt, their tires spitting gravel. Out of the sedan stepped Captain Reynolds, a 25-year veteran with a reputation for discipline and an intolerance for costly mistakes. He was flanked by 2 senior sergeants, their faces grim and professional as they took in the scene. Captain Reynolds' initial assessment was swift, his gaze sweeping over his subordinate Miller, who stood frozen, a statue of crumbling authority, and then landing on the man in running gear who stood with the unshakable stillness of a mountain. The captain's eyes, trained to read conflict and assess threats, saw none in the composed figure of Colonel Hammond. Instead, he saw something else, something familiar in the man's posture and bearing that resonated with his own brief military service decades ago. It was a look of ingrained command, an aura of authority that was earned, not issued with a badge. He took 3 purposeful steps forward, his focus entirely on the colonel, effectively erasing Officer Miller from the equation. Then, in a movement that shattered Miller's entire world, Captain Reynolds stopped, brought his heels together with an audible click, and rendered a crisp, perfect military salute. The gesture was not for show. It was an instinctual public acknowledgement of superior rank. His voice, when it came, was loud, clear, and laced with a deference that Miller had never once heard him use. He did not ask Miller what was happening. He addressed the man his officer had been terrorizing. The audio from 3 separate body cams captured the moment of validation with pristine clarity, a definitive and public reversal of power that was as humiliating as it was absolute. The captain's words echoed in the silent silence, a verdict delivered before the trial had even begun. Colonel Hammond, his composure as unyielding as the stone gate behind him, returned the captain's salute with a brief, sharp nod of acknowledgement. He did not gloat. He did not raise his voice. He simply became a witness, providing a concise and factual report of the preceding 10 minutes. He detailed the unprovoked stop, the baseless accusations, the refusal to accept a simple explanation, and the final, catastrophic error of the physical assault.
With clinical precision, he gestured toward the community's high-definition security camera, then to the common access card still held between his fingers, and finally to the body cam on Miller's own chest. He laid out the irrefutable, electronically documented evidence with the dispassionate air of a prosecutor presenting an open and shut case. Sergeant Davis's body cam, positioned over Captain Reynolds' shoulder,
provides a close-up of the captain's face as he listened. The professional concern hardened, layer by layer, into a mask of cold, controlled fury. He was not just seeing an officer who had made a mistake. He was seeing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, a public relations nightmare, and a stain on his department's reputation, all embodied in the pale, trembling form of Rick Miller. The captain turned slowly, his movement deliberate and menacing. He did not shout. His voice was a low, lethal whisper, a tone far more terrifying than any roar. The words he spoke were not a reprimand. They were an administrative execution. He ordered Officer Miller to surrender his service weapon and his badge, right there on the pristine pavement of the community he had falsely claimed to be protecting. One of the sergeants, a man who had likely shared a patrol car with Miller, stepped forward and, with practiced neutrality, disarmed him. The metallic click of the handcuffs as they were secured around Miller's wrists was the final, damning sound of his career ending. He was turned and guided towards the back of a patrol car, no longer an officer of the law, but a criminal suspect in the custody of his former colleagues. The captain then turned back to the colonel, his expression one of profound apology. He assured him that the department would cooperate fully, that justice would be swift, and that Miller's actions were an unforgivable disgrace. But the colonel was already looking past him, his mind moving on to the next tactical step. He nodded once more, his phone already in his hand, ready to make a call that would escalate the situation from a local police matter to a federal investigation. The fallout for Rick Miller was not a gradual decline, it was a controlled demolition, executed with the cold, impersonal precision of the very system he had once served. The legal and administrative machinery set in motion by Colonel Hammond's phone call ground forward with an unstoppable momentum, fueled by the irrefutable evidence captured on 3 separate cameras. Before the sun had even set on that fateful day, Miller's career was effectively over. He was suspended without pay pending an internal investigation that was a mere formality. The video footage was the entire case. It was not a matter of his word against the colonel's. It was a matter of his own recorded actions indicting him beyond any doubt. Within 90 days, a period noted in the press for its record-breaking speed, the Internal Affairs Board delivered its unanimous verdict. Rick Miller was terminated from the police force for cause, a designation that stripped him of his pension, his benefits, and any possibility of honorable discharge. His monthly salary of $6,200 vanished, leaving a void where his livelihood used to be. The badge he had polished with pride was now a museum piece in an evidence locker, his identity as a police officer surgically removed. But this was merely the first layer of his professional ruin. The criminal charges followed with the same brutal efficiency. The U.S. Attorney's Office took a particular interest in the case, seeing it as a textbook example of a violation of Title 18, Section 242 of the U.S. Code, deprivation of rights under color of law. The federal trial was short. The prosecution's case consisted almost entirely of playing the video evidence for the jury. Miller's defense attorney could offer no plausible counter-narrative. How could he argue that his client felt threatened when the colonel's posture was a study in non-aggression? How could he claim a misunderstanding when Miller's own words were dripping with undisguised contempt and prejudice? The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning a guilty verdict. The judge, a former JAG officer herself, delivered a scathing sentencing memorandum, noting that Miller had not only violated a citizen's rights, but had also disgraced his uniform and endangered public trust. The sentence was 4 years and 2 months in a federal correctional institution, a place where his former profession made him an immediate and permanent target. His life of authority was exchanged for a life of constant, vigilant fear. While the criminal case closed the door on his freedom, the civil lawsuit incinerated his financial future. Colonel Hammond, represented by a top civil rights firm, sued the county for the flagrant constitutional violations. The county's lawyers, recognizing the indefensible nature of the video evidence, quickly sought a settlement, but the colonel's legal team refused, insisting on a public trial to set a precedent. The court agreed, and the judgment was a landmark. The jury awarded a total of $6 million. The judge's order specified that this amount was intentionally punitive, designed to be a pedagogical deterrent to other state agents who might believe their badge grants them immunity from the Constitution. The county, as the primary defendant, was liable for the payment.
However, their legal charter included a recourse clause for acts of gross negligence and willful misconduct. They immediately filed a recovery action against Rick Miller personally, ensuring that the $6 million judgment became his debt. It was an anchor that would drag him to the bottom of any financial future he could ever hope to have. Any job he might secure for the rest of his life would be subject to garnishment. He was sentenced not just to prison, but to a lifetime of inescapable debt. His name became a byword for police misconduct, a case study in academies nationwide on how to commit career suicide. His family was ostracized, forced to move and change their name to escape the infamy. Meanwhile, 6 months after the trial, Colonel James Hammond was seen in a news report pinning a new star on the collar of a newly promoted brigadier general at a formal ceremony. His own career continued its upward trajectory, his honor untarnished, his life a testament to the quiet strength of discipline and integrity. The incident was a footnote in his distinguished service record, a problem that had been identified and neutralized with tactical efficiency. The karmic equation had been balanced. Miller's prejudice, a toxic asset he carried within him, had finally matured into a liability that cost him his freedom, his career, and his future. Was the lesson finally learned? Did he, in the silent solitude of his prison cell, finally understand that the world is not defined by the narrow confines of one's own bigotry, and that prejudice always, eventually, has a price?